All right, thank you, Carrie. Welcome, everyone. I call this regular meeting of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority Implementation Board to order. We will conduct this meeting via Zoom. All attendees will be muted until the public comment period. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. All visual, verbal, and written comments are public record. Board members, at various points in this meeting, we shall engage in group discussion. To ask questions or share a comment, please raise your hand by clicking the button on the right side of your screen. Then you'll be entered into the queue. When the discussions formally begin, I will call on you in the order in which your hand was raised, either with the raise your hand tab in Zoom I just mentioned, or by raising your hand to the camera. After your turn, you can raise your hand again to be entered back into the queue. Let's go on to roll call now. Sola or Carrie, I believe Sola will do a roll.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just looking for something. I will call the roll. Pastor Carrie Anderson. Nate Caminos.
Here.
Paula Caballo.
Present.
John Chelmanek.
Here.
Gordon McHenry Jr.
Present.
Harold Odom. Present. Damian Patnud.
Here.
Adrian Quinn.
Here.
Michael Ramos.
Here.
Sarah Rankin. Simha Reddy.
Present.
And Juanita Spotted Elk.
We had invited Lamont in Juanita's stead, so I'm not sure if he will be joining or not.
He
saw
said he
Lamont
would
in the-
be.
I saw
He's in
Lamont
the
in the
attendees.
attendees section.
If you could pull him over.
Sorry.
All right. Okay, well, as we move forward to do that, move on to land acknowledgement. Just want to take time today for a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that all U.S. land is originally Native American land. Here in the Pacific Northwest, the Coastal Salish are the original residents and protectors of this land. Some of the Coastal Salish tribes are not currently recognized by the federal government, such as the Duwamish tribe, thus limiting their access to key privileges granted by federally recognized tribes. Native Americans have been present in our region for thousands of years and remain present to this day. I also wanted to read an excerpt from a passage I read from Matika Wilbur recently, who is a storyteller from the Swinomish and Tulalip tribes and creator of the Project 562, and it reads, "I keep having these reoccurring dreams where I'm on a plane or train and all the people around me, native and non-native, are speaking different indigenous languages. I'm dreaming about a modern world that doesn't erase its indigenous intelligence, but rather embraces the rich complexity of indigenous culture. This can be actualized if we all bring up our hearts and minds together. The land we walk on is Indian land, whether it be suburban cul-de-sacs or city streets. Echoes of Indian existence are all around us. It's up to us to listen." Well, Harold and I usually kick off these meetings with a land acknowledgement, and I remind the group that Harold also invited, I recall, Juanita to deliver it for a recent meeting we had as well. If there are others on this board that would like to take a turn in delivering a land acknowledgement at the start of a future meeting, please don't hesitate to let Harold and I know as we graciously make room for others to do so here. I don't believe we have Mark Jones on yet to get to that point in terms of a guest for today, but we'll recognize that while he won't officially join us on anything on payroll until the 26th later this month, we do have some limited time with him this afternoon. And Harold and I wanted to let you know that we'll go ahead and shift our guest, Joe Simmons here from the State Auditor's Office, to go after Mark and the agenda today, and the immediate staff request portion of that Mark will speak to. So we'll go into public comment here next, and then if Mark's able to join, we'll go to Mark and then to Joe. Unless there's any questions, we'll go ahead.
Hey, just a point of clarification, Mark will join us at 2:30.
Okay. All right, so we'll go through public comment period, and maybe we will go to Joe then for his 15 minutes prior to the 2:30 arrival for Mark. So let's go ahead and jump into that public comment process. We have 10 minutes today on today's agenda for public comments starting at 207. If you would like to provide verbal comment, please type your name and the city from which you're calling into the chat function, which is open now, will remain open until the public comment period closes. Carrie, here on staff, will use this to build a queue for the public comment period of the agenda. In addition, you may use a chat function to provide written comments starting now until the public comment section of this agenda closes. So with that, well, actually, let's go into consent agenda and then do a public comment. Let's do this action item real quick, board. So looking at the consent agenda, working with staff and the King County Regional Homeless Authority's interim CFO, which is Francis and Company, Harold and I have arranged for several items on today's consent agenda. In order to be efficient with time, we seek the implementation board members' approval for the following 4 items. What first is the approval of the draft minutes from the implementation board's March 10th regular meeting last month. The second item is the adoption of the resolution authorizing the authority's participation in PERS, the Public Employees Retirement System. The third is the adoption of the resolution authorizing the authority to offer Social Security coverage to its employees. And the fourth and last, is the adoption of the resolution authorizing the authority's enrollment into the Washington State Deferred Compensation Program. These 3 resolutions are necessary to implement the full suite of the authority's staff benefits and are in line with King County and the City of Seattle's practices as public entities. With that, I'll call for a motion to approve the March 10th meeting minutes and the 3 resolutions as presented in today's meeting packet.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, there's a motion and a second. All in favor to approve, please vote by saying aye.
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 Any nays? Any abstentions? Okay, the minute and resolutions have been approved. Thank you, board. Now we will go to public comment. And I see, looking at the time, it's 2:09 p.m. now. So we'll set aside 10 minutes, as I mentioned before, to hear from members of the public. If you wish to comment and have not yet typed your name and city in the chat window to be called upon, please do so now. Each individual will be given 2 minutes to comment. Carrie will call on individuals in the order they have been provided in the chat window and unmute them. Carrie will announce when you reach your 2 minutes and ask you to finish your comment and call on the next speaker. I will close public comment. I'll look at, see, it just turned 2:10 now. Close public comment period at 2:20. Public comment is now open.
Thank you, Nate. We do have one person who's raised their hand. So Cindy, I am going to go ahead and unmute you and allow you to speak if you would like to. Your time starts. As soon as I get the unmute to work, give me just a second. All right,
Hi,
Cindy.
can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now. You're welcome to go ahead and speak for up to 2 minutes.
Okay, well, first I think I'd like to thank you guys. This has been a big job for you, and I'm not sure how much longer you're going to stay on once you design this agency. So if this is, I don't think it's quite the last time, but if I don't say thank you. It was a big job. And I just want the first job descriptions that you've posted, I hope that those people can think outside of the box. I hope that they don't have an attitude, well, that's how we've always done it. Because I've been looking at what HUD rules are, and then I've realized every housing authority can do it kind of their own way as long as they stay within the policies. And King County is really restrictive. I just thought that was how the feds were. And I realized, no, that's how King County is. I would love, I don't have time and I'm not going to, but I would love to study each housing authority in this state because they're very different. They're much kinder with the tenant-based vouchers. We've decided to have permanent supportive housing for a person's life, the rest of their life, because they were homeless one time. And no, you don't get to move. This is where you're going to stay the rest of your life. You were homeless. We put you in this apartment. You need permanent supportive housing. That was shocking to me. And And I think a lot of the government King County employees just thought, well, that's how we always do it. They must have issued us those type of vouchers, and they don't. You guys get to choose the kind of vouchers you want, and I didn't realize that. That's probably for tomorrow. I will also wish that these new government employees or administrators you're going to hire are going to be more accessible. I find it very frustrating that I cannot find a phone number and an email address for a higher level person in King County to share my opinion. It's been extremely frustrating. It means I'm not worth anything. My opinion to help the homeless is not worth anything. And I'm going to close for now, but Harold, I'd like your email. Would have loved to reach you. I know some apartments that really need your help. And you seem like the kind of guy that could come out and hit the ground and just give some people some hope. But I can't reach out to Harold. I don't know how to
Reached your 2 minutes, so please wrap up soon.
Okay, I have one more question. How does the executive director of King County Housing Authority get there? Does Dow Constantine appoint him? How does he get that job? Because that job, the executive director of the King County Housing Authority, which is different than this one, has a lot of power. And I think he's appointed by Dow, but I want to confirm that.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Thank you. At this time, I don't see anybody else with their hand raised. I did want to mention, if you're calling in and you'd like to speak and you don't have access to chat, you can push *9 on your phone to raise your hand, and then I can call on you. I do see one other person. We've got Bill Curlin Hackett, who has signed up. Give me just 1 second to get my timer going, Bill. All right. Bill, you are welcome to go ahead and give public comment for 2 minutes.
Greetings to all of you. I hope you're eager to start actual work and not just informing each other on how to do this work. I have two things. One is I hope you will factor in some regional presence in groups like the Eastside Homelessness Advisory Committee and South King Homeless Forum and other places where I don't want to have to be the one to inform them what you're doing. And so far, that's what's happening. I think you can inform them much better than I can. The other thing I'd like to bring up is that we're facing chaos for people living in vehicles as the 72-hour moratorium in Seattle is being considered for restoration. We've faced that around the county since none of the others had moratoriums. We see more people in vehicles. It's a crisis. The outreach call this morning that we participate in with the HOPE team and others, we're all seeing it, all the reach and all the other outreach teams. I know you can't necessarily do anything in action right now. It's the city of Seattle and others, but the influence you can begin to direct toward that and toward other remedies. COVID has provided us many curses, but also many blessings where we don't have to continue to do it the same old way. And we would like to see different ways of doing it. We're gathering advocates, lawyers, housing providers, and others to talk about new ways to do this. And ultimately that will be your work guide. And we hope we can hit the ground running for you or with you. So I just want to alert you that we're on the streets with many people fearful of what might happen if a 72-hour move requirement is restored in Seattle. It is going to be utter chaos. So thank you. And as you're able outside this board and on it, your voices will matter toward keeping civility and calm and stability. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. And at this time, I see no one else has signed up for public comment, Nate.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you to you too for sharing your comments with us today. For anyone who did not have an opportunity to provide comment and would still like to, we will leave the chat window open for the next 10 minutes. Looking at the time, 2:15, 2:16. I know we have 15 minutes for our guest here, Joe Simmons from State Auditor's Office. So let's go ahead and jump to him. I would now like to introduce our guest, Joe Simmons from the Washington State Auditor's Office. Joe is the Central Team Audit Manager for the State Auditor and conducts local government audits in King County with a primary focus on Seattle. We invited Joe in order to officially meet the Implementation Board and share information about the State Auditor's Office. So welcome, Joe, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me and taking the time to hear a little bit about the State Auditor's Office and our role. So as you said, my name's Joe Simmons. I'm the audit manager for our team here in Seattle. And obviously I work for the State Auditor's Office, and that's a separately elected branch of government where Auditor Pat McCarthy is a separately elected official who's responsible for audits throughout the state. So we audit over 2,000 local governments from largest counties such as King County all the way down to small fire districts and water districts all around the state. And also, as you mentioned, we do have teams. So we have teams that focus on different areas around the state. So here in Seattle, my team focuses on audits within the city of Seattle city limits. So we already audit King County, City of Seattle, Seattle School District, Port of Seattle. And basically, I can also touch base, again, kind of overview is we conduct 3 main types of audits from our local audit team. We perform financial statement audits, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. We perform the audits just like a CPA firm would do. We perform in accordance with auditing standards. And basically, we audit the financial statements prepared by the local government to determine that they're fairly stated, and do that on an annual basis. For a local government of your size, it likely would be an annual audit. For some smaller governments, we do it more in a cycle based on the size of the government. And again, that's where we come in after year end, after the financial statements are prepared, and audit those financial statements, determine whether the balances are fairly stated and that all the adequate disclosures are there. And then if we do find any issues, on all our audits, we definitely work to communicate sooner than later within the local government as to any concerns. And if we do find any issues, then there's different levels that we report at. So for a financial statement audit, again, we'd have an opinion on the financial statement along with the financial statements. If there's an issue that rises to a higher level of, say, material misstatements in the financial statements or internal control issues that rise to a level that they're material, that could result in a finding that's in the report. For findings, the local government has an opportunity to respond to that. And again, definitely I want to emphasize that we focus on communicating sooner than later throughout the audit to make sure there's no surprises. So that's one of our main types of audits. Then another type of audit that we conduct is the federal single audit. And those are audits that we also perform for King County, City of Seattle, where we audit in accordance with requirements from the federal government, and that relates to the grants that local governments receive. So we audit those grants based on criteria from the federal government, and we have a process based on the requirements of the federal government that we select certain grants based on the size and the risk, and audit a number of those grants every year on a cycle, again, based on the size and criteria that provided by the federal government to see that we get adequate coverage of the grants received by those local governments. And we issue a separate report on those. And we also would have different levels of reporting, that if there is an issue that is material to those grants, or where we find that there's issues with how this money was spent, basically what we call question costs, that we could report that. And again, we could have a finding regarding if there's any concerns with controls over the grant or compliance with requirements of the grant. And those are all very specifically laid out in the federal requirements, and that's what we audit to. And for that, we also issue a report and provide that to the local government in draft form, and then publish that on our website, as we would with the financial statement audits also. And the third category that we conduct from the local audit side is what we call accountability audits. And that's a little bit different than the other ones. That's where we focus more on compliance with state law, requirements in the state constitution, on things like prohibitions on lending a credit, things like that. And then also state laws that affect basically anything related to financial transactions. And then we also audit to the policies, procedures, the local government's own prescribed regulations. So we also look at controls over things that might not rise to material level for the financial statements, but could be of a concern to the public if there is misuse of, say, credit cards, where again the dollars might be lower, but we look at things that could be sensitive to the public if there's some kind of misuse of those or abuse. And also that we look to see that the government's safeguarding its assets. So that would fall under taking a look at how they track assets that they're responsible for, how they track revenues that come into the local government. Again, part of that's covered in the financial statement audit, but we can also focus on some of the revenues that might be of higher risk due to how they're received by the local government. So the accountability audit, we have a ability to drill in a little bit more again into some of these areas that might be a little bit more at risk, or where the public would be concerned if there was some kind of misuse or loss of public funds. And for that, we also issue a report that's, again, we provide in draft first to local government and then publish it on the site. And another audit area that I'll at least mention is the performance audits, but I'll say that those are conducted centrally from our office in Olympia. We don't conduct those at the local level. Those are planned and performed by a different division. So I think that covers our main areas of audit, and then just a little bit about our process. That on every audit, we have certain steps we go through that, again, I'll keep emphasizing, we really value communicating with the local government. We never want surprises. We don't want to be gotcha auditors. We really look at our role as serving the public and working with local government. We are an independent voice. We do work to make sure that there is transparency and accountability for local government, but we also realize local governments are working hard to do the job that they were designed for, and we're there to basically provide that independent look. But we also, again, want to make sure that there's good communication, and that if we do identify any issues during the audit, that we let the government know sooner than later and give them every chance to respond. So on every audit, we have an audit liaison that's generally someone in the finance area, like could be the CFO or county manager, but there's somebody that's designated that we're going to work with throughout the audit. And then we also, report to the board that we have what we call an entrance conference at the beginning of the audit, where we lay out the scope of the audit and talk about what's going to be covered in that audit. And for that, we invite the members of the governing board. Some local governments choose to have an audit committee, and we work with that audit committee, but we definitely always want to make sure we're communicating with the board that's responsible for that local government. And then during the audit, again, we'd be working closely with staff and the audit liaison. And again, I keep emphasizing, if we do identify any issues, we would definitely start working those through with the liaison and make sure we have all the information we need. We always want to make sure we get things right. So if we do have any recommendation, we want to make sure that they're a value to the local government and fully supported. And once we conclude the audit, then we end with the exit conference, which is dovetails with the entrance conference, that at the end of the audit, we would also meet with representatives of the board or the audit committee and management to talk about the results of the audits. And then we would go over any recommendations we'd have. And I touched on the fact that the highest level we have is what we call findings, and those would be what would be actually in the report. And once again, we actually really do want to have a response from the local government as to their stance on the recommendations and their plan to address that. And then we have lower level recommendations. Next level would be management letter, where it's not in the report, but it's referenced that we wrote a management letter, and that's available to the public if someone requests it. And then we have a next level, which we call exit items, where it's lower level items where we basically are trying to really get ahead of something. If there's something that we can see that there could be some kind of improvement, and trying to stave off it going to a higher level, that we'd make a recommendation at that lower level. And those, again, would all be communicated to management at the end of the audit. So definitely want to make sure that I'm also here to answer any questions you have, and I'm trying to at least give you a kind of a broad overview of how our audits work. And again, as I said, specifically here in Seattle, we already audit King County, City of Seattle, and we definitely are going to be working to leverage our knowledge of the city and the county and working with this new agency. And obviously I'll be working with the staff here as to working on when to schedule our first audit based on when the authority is ready for that and has activity where we would be able to begin the audit. I know you're still in the planning stage right now, but again, I really appreciate the chance to at least give you that overview of how our audits work and what we do. So I think my time is getting close to up. So.
And you're good, Joe. Thank you for a rundown on all of that. We still don't have our incoming CEO in the room quite yet, but we do also, this is an opportunity for any questions that we have with Joe, and I see Gordon first off.
Thank you, Nate. Joe, appreciate the overview. We are, as you ended your overview, we are early in the creation stage. So I have a two-part question. Knowing that we are in the early stages of this entity, when would we likely be participating in an audit? And after that first one, what is the cadence? Is the cadence based on a calendar year, a fiscal year, 12 months after the preceding audit, whenever that is? Just a little context for me, please. Thank you.
Certainly, yeah. So the first audit would be the first year where there is actual revenue and expenditure activities. So once you're collecting revenues and spending that money, that would be the first year that we would be auditing. We'd also cover the audit to the date of creation. So sometimes there's a little bit of lag from when it was created to when there's actual activity to audit. So that would be where I would look at having that first audit. So that would basically cover that year of activity to the beginning. And then the cycle, again, based on what I know about the authority, that it's going to be a fairly large organization. And we do have thresholds where, as I said, there's smaller local governments that we do those on a 2-year or even a 3-year cycle for some very small local governments. But in your case, it would be on an annual cycle. And I'm also assuming that you'll be having those federal grants that will be coming to the authority as you are created and begin taking shape. So for your question about the timing, it would be based on the fiscal year. So I guess I should know that, but I'm not sure if it would be that. So we do have some that are on a June 30th fiscal year, but if it's calendar year, then and that's your fiscal year, then that's what it would be based on. And then say it is, if your fiscal year is December 31st, we would be coming in for the financial statement audit. It generally would be in the late spring, summer, and we generally try to do the financial statement audit and the single audit together when we can. And for the federal single audit, there is a deadline of that audit has to be completed and submitted to the federal government within 9 months of the end of the fiscal year. So that would be always the deadline we would be aiming at, again, assuming that there's a single audit involved.
Nate, you're muted.
Thank you, Joe and Gordon, for your question. Any other questions for Joe? All right. Well, thank you, Joe, for your time today. And good to meet you as our contact at the State Auditor's Office. But looking forward to working with you too as we get going.
All right. It's good to meet all of you. And again, thank you for your time. And I know Solo has my contact information, so feel free to reach out to me anytime with any questions whatsoever. I guess the other thing I'll emphasize, I'd rather talk about things beforehand than come in later on and find out, well, if you had done it this way, that might not have been an issue. So again, definitely very happy to talk at any time about any questions that come up. So.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Joe, for all of that. Appreciate it.
Okay. I think I'll go ahead and sign out here. And again, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks again. Take care. All right. Well, I see Mark has joined us. Now good to see you, Mark. Welcome to our board meeting today. We kind of previewed your arrival to walk us through the immediate staffing request portion of today's agenda. And with that, Harold's here to facilitate. But before we get into that, I guess, Mark, did you want to say a few words, or board members, anything, any welcome remarks or for Mark before we get into that?
Welcome. We can't wait for you to start.
I think Mark's already been working for like a month before they even eventually start in another couple of weeks.
I continue to be very excited. I'm glad to be with you all. I've been doing some work, it's true, but just trying to make sure that day one can be an actual day one instead of sort of like trying to find the keys, right? So, which is part of what I'm here to chat with you all about tonight. But really, really excited and very grateful to Sola and Jeannie and the staff team for being just tremendously supportive as I reach out with all manner of requests that they have been extremely gracious about.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark, and thanks everyone. All right, to my fellow co-chair, Mr. Odom, I'll hand the floor, the gavel to you.
Well, thank you, Nate. Thank you very much. Welcome, Mark. Sorry I was not able to get back to you this morning. That was 5:40 that you said that, it was kind of early for me. So I just turned over and went back to sleep. But welcome. So we're here today to facilitate a request by Mark. If you remember, I think it was back in September, we received a memo that we had initially 5 critical staff members that the CEO would be able to help him get up and running. And today we're going to request, that request has been, the ask is that request has been allocated to 10 critical members that Mark would like to have on staff immediately to get to RC, the King County Regional Homeless Authority up and running. I hate acronyms. But so I'd like Mark to go over maybe the additional 5 or consolidate the 5 that we had before into the 10 that you're requesting now. So Mark, if you could briefly give us an overview.
For sure. And thank you, Harold. So the general gist is we are like just a casual 7 months behind schedule, as I think you all are aware. And being 7 months behind schedule, there's quite a bit of work to do. And a lot of it has to be done on a significantly expedited timeline. And 5 people is actually just not enough. When I look at the initial staffing plan that I had prepared during the design work and sort of the structure of the proposed teams, essentially what I'm saying is I'd like to have the authorization to hire in all of those chiefs and some of the senior directors. The roles that are currently posted are a chief program officer, a chief for community impact, a comms director, and an equity position, and a deputy CEO and chief of staff. I would like to be able to expand that to include a chief operating officer, the ombuds role, and a sub-regional planning manager. I think, and potentially also a special projects role as well. I just don't think that there's a possibility that we will be able to get done what we need to get done without that kind of expertise on hand and available. I think I'm particularly worried for a number of reasons, which I think are probably well felt by this board, about the capacity to engage in a robust sub-regional process that begins and has some teeth in it, frankly, before the culmination of any final staffing plan. I want to make sure that the staffing plan that's developed actually has some input that is regional in terms of what we think we need to roll out, right? And so making sure that we have the capacity to do that feels really, really important. Additionally, there's just a lot of systems to build. And system building takes a lot of time, a lot of bandwidth, and a lot of different kinds of talents. I think that, we've been really pleased to see some really strong candidates for the 2 chief roles that are posted, and doing some strong courting on the deputy CEO role. But I think that ultimately, right, like, we'll be able to get some really solid talent in-house to begin to be able to build things out, which last thing, I'm also a little bit worried in candor from a budget perspective. I'd like to move as much as possible in-house as rapidly as possible. I think that when I look at the startup budget, what's been expended, and what we're looking at in terms of admin availability for next year, I want to make sure that we're not burning through flexible dollars that could be better applied, frankly, towards procurement of, contract management systems or procurement of other things that we'll need in the long term. And we'll pause for questions.
I did have one question, Mark. Equity officer, why would you elevate a person to that level? And I'm not criticizing, I think it's excellent, but maybe give some insight onto that.
The equity position is actually a senior director position. So it's a director for equity and justice is what's posted. It's not a chief role. The chief role is the ombuds role. And in fact, the decision to not have that equity role at a chief position is in part because of the ombuds role. That if you had a chief for equity and the ombuds, there's role overlap there that becomes difficult to manage from a scope perspective. Whereas having a senior director for equity and justice is I can tailor that to be more narrow and applied, rather than the sort of sweeping scope that the ombuds role will have. Harold, I can't hear you. Oh, wait, there you are.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I was just saying, we'd like to open up for questions from the board members, and I'm sure we have some eager questions to be asked of Mark.
Harold, I see Simha's hand.
Okay, thank you. Silas? Dr. Reddy?
Thanks, Mark. I think your explanation for why the expansion of 5 to 10 makes a lot of sense. Like, we really need to move quickly, and these seem like good positions. One question I had was, have you considered whether there would be a role for something like a chief health officer or a chief medical officer, given sort of the close interconnection with health issues, both physical and mental?
I did, actually, and it's something that I would love to chat more frankly with you about, and then also with the rest of the board after we've had an opportunity to conduct some of the initial sub-regional planning activities. I think that if I'm being transparent, right, which is generally my style, my question right now is whether or not it's a chief role or if it lives inside the program unit, right? And I think it's a functional question about sort of how much in the business of health we see ourselves being. And I don't know the answer to that quite yet. I certainly see a need for some function or role that is like dedicated to a system integration and coordination aspect with health systems. Again, it's just a question of whether or not that's underneath the chief program officer or elevated to its own chief position.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks. I don't have a strong opinion on that either, so I think it makes sense to wait and see.
Do you have any other questions?
I see Adrian.
Thanks, Harold and Mark. I agree, Mark, that I think it makes sense to move quickly. I have a question both about, do you have the bandwidth to do that many hires at the same time and ensure that you've got the pool that you feel that you need? And then secondly, I'm curious about how the word is getting out about the positions.
Yeah, spoken like a former administrator. So on the question of bandwidth, like, no, but like, don't have a lot of choices. So I think we're trying to be as expeditious as possible, but also thoughtful. So Sola and I have been working on making sure that everyone has a process that is, like, you could look at, you could audit and be like, who did they talk to? What questions were they asked, right? We are also being really clear that everyone has to, and I want to thank Lamont and Harold for this, everyone is going through the LEC as well. So everyone has a panel interview, and everyone has at a minimum, everyone has a panel interview, and everyone has a time with the LEC. And so that, I think, is making sure that we are sort of dotting our I's, crossing our T's in terms of our sort of key stakeholder groups. In terms of the word out, I've sent it out to all my networks. I've posted it a bunch of places. Sol and I were just having a conversation yesterday or today about whether or not we wanted to put them on Indeed or other kinds of places. I think that my previous experience, candidly, is that oftentimes that leads to an influx that is not manageable. So I think we're going to try to see if there's not a middle ground there, perhaps asking city and county partners to post to their respective sites, et cetera. As if we feel like the candidate pool for something is too thin in order to make a good decision. Right now, what we are doing is treating them all as open until fulfilled, right? So as candidates that clearly have the chops, put their hat in the ring, we just start moving them through. And I think that again, hopefully will get us some really competent folks, at least in a couple seats, which then can bolster our capacity to run recruitment and searches and hiring in a more comprehensive and thorough way, as more people can just have eyes on it. But I feel good. I want to be clear. I feel good about the process we're running. I feel good about the engagement that it's had, and that the right folks are getting access to the candidates.
So I have C. John Shamanak, hands up. And I would like to, before we go to John, I think John's going to mention this anyway, but South Cities, I know Mayor Backus, I'm trying to get a relationship with her on how we can communicate better. And I know Nate is vigorously working with South City. So I don't want to forget South Cities in their request to make sure they're heard, especially Mayor Backus, when we were going through the governance committee on your hire. She was very adamant about making sure South Cities was heard, and especially her voice. So let's not forget her. I think there's a partnership that could be made there. John?
Thank you, Harold. Mark, welcome aboard. Good to have you. Good to have you on, and good to get over this to where we now can actually do some work on homelessness. So I'm excited about that. This may be a question for you, also perhaps for staff, but what sort of assistance does Mark have in the human resources role, both from, I can't remember if we hired an outside firm to help us in general with human resources, so that he doesn't have to do the whole job, that we make sure the legal boxes are checked, all of those sorts of things take place, so we don't have any of those sorts of oops, and that frankly, rather than managing a inbox from Indeed, which I agree completely with Mark, it'd be way too much you'd get way too many applicants. I'm just wondering how we get him some help so that he doesn't have to manage the whole process and be setting up those interviews for people. I'd much rather have him working on those policy issues.
Yeah, I will say that, again, Sola has been a tremendous help, as well as his team, in terms of ensuring that I'm not just having to manage the actual mechanics. Sola actually has taken on managing the recruitment inbox and making sure that the non-LEC panels get scheduled and all that kind of stuff. And so that has been a really significant assist. I think that to the specifics of HR, we have had some conversation about exactly what our needs are there. And I think that where we are is that so we do not have an HR firm or consultant at this point in time contracted. The conversation that we've had, and so please correct me if I'm wrong, is that we don't believe that is necessary at this point in time based on what we see our immediate needs are. And so we'll be coordinating respectively with city and county HR in order to make sure that the legal requirements are checked off, and that we're making sure that, you know, we're not posting things or asking things that we can't. I have run a number of hiring processes before, so the basics are very clear to me. The things that I always want to make sure of are like local law that I may not frankly be aware of because I haven't run a search in King County before. And so the city and county teams have both been very gracious in making sure that they can offer that support. I think that when we get into some of the other stuff with regards to when we think about HR administration in terms of like, you know, benefits administration and payroll and that kind of stuff, there is a firm that has been retained to help manage that process. And they are in flight doing quite a bit of work. I will be connecting with them more closely in the next, well, once I formally start. And then I think doing a little bit of review of work that's been done, you know, sort of what the contract entails, and then making some preliminary decisions, again, around candidly, what's in-house, what's out, and how to make sure that we're vectoring towards an agency that can be rapidly self-sufficient.
Well, I just encourage you to get someone in who is going to be able to manage that process for you. So whether that's your chief of staff or your COO, you know, make that hire, get that good person, and then delegate that off so that you can do the work that you need to do.
Yeah, I agree.
Minutes. Any more questions? I'm sure someone has some questions. Mr. McHenry?
Mark, great to have you almost on board. Not at all surprised and appreciative that you're already working. Of course, would expect no less and hope we aren't violating any employment laws or ethics. But of course, it's what you signed up for. So excited to, and I think a little bit to probably Adrian and John's question, my question was going to be, you know, what support can we offer or provide to you, especially in these first couple of weeks, first month of your leadership?
I will say the two things that would be particularly helpful. One, you know, the postings for these current open positions are on the website. If you can grab them and get them out, right? Just get them in front of people who you think are qualified, are interested. You know, what I have said to candidates who are in the pipeline and also just broadly is like, we have an incredible opportunity that people rarely get, which is to build government from the ground up. No one gets that opportunity. It's kind of a once in a lifetime thing. And so in that space, right, we have a tremendous capacity to build things the right way, right? And so I'm really, really hopeful to get folks who are both deeply knowledgeable of what government is, but also want to be creative about what it could be, right? I think that, you know, there are fundamentals, like there's procurement law, right? However, what we also have the opportunity to do is to approach that as a kite string rather than a cage, and to think of those kinds of restrictions as things that we can be creative about and can actually allow us to fly rather than get in the way of what we're trying to do. The other thing that I would say is, and I've started to have this conversation with both Jeannie and Sola, is I have to meet with a lot of people in the first, like, you know, 14 days. And so if you have folks that you would like us to sit down with in the near term that you think are not on our radar, or frankly, even if you do think they're on our radar, please do send that information to us so that we can begin to get folks on the schedule. I would also simultaneously appreciate a little bit of soft messaging that like I am one person. And so while I am deeply, deeply understanding about people's desire to have a conversation with me urgently, right? That I do still have a certain number of hours in the day. And so that if I have not reached out, or if we are not scheduled for a conversation on the 26th, that doesn't mean anything other than that like we are still all subject to the bounds of time. And as soon as I'm not subject to the bounds of time, I then will do better.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you, Mark. Will do.
Thank you.
Mark, we had a question in public comment earlier. I don't know if you're here for that. I believe Cindy and Pastor Hackett want to know if King County Regional Homeless Authority employees are going to be accessible to the public or to agencies and not have to go through a host of red tape to get access or get comment.
So we'll, as an agency, we'll have the posture of transparency and accessibility. One of the inboxes that was the first thing that we set up, thanks to Carrie, was a general inbox for people to just send stuff to. Again, being one person, I can't say that I'm responding to a lot of that stuff right now. But like, I want to make sure that like we have, as we build out, we continue to robustly build out ways that people can access us and ways that we can respond, right? I think that the other thing that, you know, in some of the staffing design work that I did previously, a lot of it actually was in response to community feedback that the current agencies did not feel accessible and did not feel collaborative, right? That like there was a real need and a desire, frankly, both on the part of staff and on the part of the community for more collaborative and problem-solving based interactions than interactions that felt more directive or frankly more transactional in just the nature of contract management. And so that preliminary staffing plan does posture us towards collaboration as a key function rather than management as a key function. Again, what I need now is data on what does that mean countywide, right? And in order to frankly think about headcount that's appropriate, role scopes that are appropriate. You know, how much is it a person who has a region? Is it a person who has, you know, a program type, right? So are you attached to Eastern King County or are you attached to youth-based programming, right? Those kinds of delineations are going to need to be made with much more granular information about county-wide needs than what I currently have available. But the goal will always be to drive towards collaborative function rather than managerial function, out of this sort of primary belief, right, that the only way that we're actually going to end homelessness in King County, which we all believe is possible, is by working on it together rather than having, you know, sort of sole ownership or authority, right, that doesn't have the fundamentals of, you know, again, to my mind, good government embedded.
Harold,
Further
Hardy.
questions?
Hardy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who was that?
Go ahead, Harold. I think we were just about to just now be able to hear you.
Okay. So semi Dr. Reddy, did you have another question?
Yeah, I just had a kind of practical one. What about stuff like administrative support, just having somebody to help you with scheduling and, you know, the sort of like task-oriented things?
Yeah.
Like, is there a space for that somewhere?
Yeah, really critical question. Thank you. I have been fortunate enough to receive support from the county on that. And so today I actually interviewed a couple folks for a role providing administrative support. How that will work is they will actually be hired into the county and then loaned to the authority. So they will not be authority staff, and that's the reason why I have not posted for that role, and instead have prioritized making funds available in order to bring in chiefs and other, you know, sort of leaders of bodies of work. But absolutely, I'm trying to get someone who can help me just sort of like keep things running as soon as possible.
last call for questions on this subject.
I saw Michael. Michael go after.
Michael Ramos. Mr.
Mark,
Ramos.
welcome aboard. Welcome aboard. We're very excited about your time and your skill and experience, and we're just very excited for you and for all of us. So thank you for jumping aboard. One is a practical question about our communications, and we need some adjudication about public record and ability to communicate with you. So someone will have to send us the parameters. We all have a lot to share, but want to do it the right way. So someone can send us the guidelines on that. That would be great. Then the second thing is related to whether I'm supportive of the positions as you've explained them. Makes sense to me. I was wondering whether you gave consideration to a position such as Director of Governmental Relations.
Yeah.
The reason I say that is because the cities are very independent and autonomous, and I work in a number of them, and I have seen the interplay with issues around addressing homelessness over many years. And I think that flipping the dime in terms of both positive relationships and constructing an architecture that can really address homelessness across the region will require both skill and tenacity you bring to the table, and will require that kind of dedication. So just a thought.
Yeah, it is in my mind. So the role that's scoped right now for the comms role is actually external affairs and communications, and has room underneath it to build out sub specialties, including government affairs, regional, or dedicated functions for city or county, et cetera. I think that my hope is that we can make significant headway on understanding, again, like what the balance of those roles are through some of the initial work that we'll be doing via meetings, and then I hope later in the summer, as we're able to, actually in-person listening sessions, et cetera. I'll also say that I do view very much the role of governmental affairs and of regional governmental affairs to be my job, and also the job of my entire senior team. Like that is, like, we are a regional authority. We recognize, I certainly recognize the dynamics, right, that you're pointing towards, and consider it to be like a core component of what we come to work every day to do, right? Of really trying to build a fabric, relational, policy, fiscal, right, that can house all the people who need to be housed. And so I think that is really going to be a core approach for this entire team. And you'll see many of us, I think, over the months and years, right, in those roles, right? I think, in every single posting, you'll see that it says, with other requirements, right, like extensive regional travel, like, because like the expectation is that, like, if you're on this team, you will get in a car. You'll get in a car and you will drive there, right? And so I really, really want that to be a core of our approach, right? That it is relational, that we are really focused on to your point, building those relationships and building the goodwill and helping to flip some of the narrative.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask a last call for any questions on this subject.
Yeah, one quick one, Harold.
Yeah.
And thank you, Mark, for presenting all of this. And for the board too, a question was raised, I think it was from Gordon earlier, of like, what can we do to help you, Mark, as you soon to onboard and attempt to do all these hires? And answering that question, Harold and I and staff actually purposely have framed today's agenda where the next topic will be talking about resurrecting our conversation where we last left off back in January too, about board officers, committee structures too, while Mark's going to be setting out to 5 to hopefully 10 staffers at the start to get the ground running in terms of that staff support. I think, wanted to revisit, as we've been operating for about 8 months or so now as a board, beyond Harold and I as co-chairs, kind of what does that framework and structure look like on each of these items too, and how that can in turn coordinate with the staff that Mark will be bringing on. One of the questions we even brought up last fall and we left off in January was the idea of having some members of a subcommittee work alongside Mark, at least in terms of the first 6 months of their onboarding, to make sure to be an advisory and guidance board, essentially, of the implementation board as they hit the ground running. So, but I do have a question at the end of all of that, just in terms of at least teeing the board's mind and thinking through where we are now before we get to the next section of today's agenda. And that is, Mark, I know you're going to be probably taking this question at tomorrow's governing committee as we look to soon consider a motion to express support for your staffing request to bring to the governing committee tomorrow. But do you already have the other 5 job descriptions drafted? And should the governing committee approve tomorrow, how soon might be able to post them? And that might be a question more for SOLA and staff to jump in.
I have the preliminary drafts done. They need to be, to John's point, right? Like box checked on EEO requirements and legal. And then I need to do budget alignment on the salary ranges, but then they're good to go. So we can get them posted, I would say, within a weekish maximum. I think that to the larger question about board not composition, sorry, but board structure, the thing, and I've had the opportunity to chat with some of you about this, but 2 things come to mind for me. One is just as you consider this, to think about what is a permanent body of work versus what's a time-limited body of work versus what is just a thing you're very interested in, right? And I say that because I think that there is going to be a need for some permanent subcommittees to help steward bodies of work that are budget related, for example, right? Like, and the likelihood is that, like, me and the authority team will prepare a budget, bring it to the budget committee, do that round of feedback, then bring it to the full board and then to the governing committee, right? And that we'll do that basically every year, right? And then there are other things that I think, like onboarding, for example, which may not need even an ad hoc committee, but may just be like a body of work that we're like trying to architect together. And so I really think about that as you tee yourselves up. And then the other thing that I would put out there is that in the thinking about how this board came to be in the design process, right? The desire was, and my desire remains, right, for the CEO to really have a group of experts to ask questions of. And that's really what what the community really wanted, and what I am really hopeful, right, that will become our working relationship, is that that there is a place to take, sort of like, hey, Adrian, you've done this, and like, I'm curious, right? Like, what is the best way you did it, and what is the way you wish you could have done it, right? Or, if we're doing faith outreach, right, to say like, Pastor Anderson, like, what do you think here? These are things that I think, that's the sort of the dynamic I would like us to be able to build towards, is a set of exchanges that are more focused on policy and less focused on operations, to the extent, right, that we're able to do that, because the operations of the authority will be the job of my team, and what we should be bringing you is the high level operational questions, right, that are essentially still policy questions. A budget is a policy question, right? So that, I think, is how I would sort of leave you all to consider that. And again, I'm happy to have more conversation about that at the May meeting or in other, sort of smaller venues as you all feel is needed.
Great, thanks. And for those in the chat, both in terms of the board and as well as the attendees, the positions of the 5 that was referenced earlier in your memo that are already up or on the recruitment tab of our authority's homepage. And again, the link of it is in the chat for folks as well. But that's all I had. Back to Harold.
Don't monitor the chat that well. I'm very invigorated and almost back to healthy. But I don't have my computer with me, so I'm not really monitoring the chat. So Nate, thank you very much for that. So with no further questions, to ask Mark, and Mark, I don't think you can leave. I would like to stay up in the next section as well.
Sorry, I missed that last part.
So no matter where I'm at in Seattle or wherever I'm in King County, there are planes that will go over me if I'm outside and buzz me. I don't know what it is. So at this point, I'm going to entertain a motion to move the request forward from 5 to 10. And Sola, will this just be a simple roll call of yeas and nays?
This will be a full roll call.
Okay. So, Sola, can you take it over on this?
Let's first entertain a motion.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I did entertain the motion. I didn't hear it. I didn't hear it. Yeah.
I propose the motion.
Thank you, Adrian.
Seconded.
Thank you, Lamont.
I'll go ahead and call
Any further
it.
discussion?
And for the record, too, it was presented by Adrian and seconded by Simha.
Thank you. I'll call the roll. Pastor Anderson. I might come back to Pastor Anderson. Nate Caminos.
I'm here.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Thank you. Nate Caminos.
Yes.
Paula Carvalho.
Yes.
John Chelmanek.
Sorry about that. Yes.
Gordon McHenry Jr.
Yes.
Harold Odom. Damian Patnaud.
Yes.
Adrian Quinn.
Yes.
Michael Ramos.
Yes.
Sarah Rankin is absent today. Simha Reddy.
Yes.
And Lamont Green for Juanita Spotted Elk.
Yes.
Thank you. I didn't count, but that's all yeses. No no's, no abstentions. One absence.
So with that, the motion is passed, and we'll offer to the governance committee tomorrow for their vote. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we've touched on a little bit about committees and board officers. These are two distinct conversations we're going to be having. Committees that will help Mark in the ad hoc are long-lasting or short. However, but we're not going to vote on those today. But we'd like to get comment and things that you're interested in or things you'd like to be part of. We have a great deal of talent here on the implementation board. And yes, for 8 months, we've kind of been silent. Let's just break out of that shell and get some committees going. And those of you who wish to be board members or board officers, please speak up now. So in the next meeting, we'll be able to solidify some of those, and Mark could bring back some committees that he would like more activity on. So with that, I'm just going to go down alphabetically and ask people to comment on their opinions known. But first, I'd like to ask Mark if he would like to speak more to this on the committees that might be top of mind right now.
No, thank you. I was just saying that I was about to peel off, but I would just say that like budget and regional engagement, right, are the things that are top of mind for me, and I think are likely more standing bodies of work, right? I think that there are other things that I could certainly see ad hoc work around, right? So for example, I've had conversations with Adrian about systems integration work that feels like it could be, I think to Dr. Reddy's point, right? Like something that like we could take on as something we want to take a hard pass at in the first 18 months, right? And so I think like, that would be my suggestion, is like, think about the 2 or 3 things that we got to do every year, and then think about everything else as potential ad hoc, for like, where do you have a burning sense of desire to get something done, or frankly unease about how something has been done. And really excited to continue this conversation with you all next month.
Nate?
On the spot.
Nate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Gordon.
Oh, sorry, Nate or Harold? Yeah, sorry. I couldn't see my screen. Hi, Harold. Sorry about that.
Yeah, all good.
Harold, before Mark goes, he may have already gone. Could I have just 30 seconds of personal prerogative? I wanted the board to know that in the spirit of continuing community focus on the complexity of homelessness, and also lifting up Mark in his role, and also the importance of public health and regionalism, United Way is having a briefing on homelessness on May 4th, and I'm going to facilitate. Mark is one of the panelists. Patty Hayes from Seattle King County Public Health is another panelist, and Ed Prince from City of Renton and Sound Cities is the third panelist. So I'll try to push that information out to all of you, but maybe some of you are interested, or some of your folks in your network are interested, and hopefully it'll help with the onboarding of Mark and the importance of the work ahead, and to do so on a regional basis. Thanks. And thank you, Mark, for agreeing to do it within your first week of official employment.
Not a problem. I think, again, these are the kinds of things that I was saying, like, to all of you, if there are places you think I should go, groups you think I should talk to, please just throw them at me, right? Like, the likelihood of me saying no is very slim. The no's would be, again, a matter of like, I apologize, all of that time is gone, right? So really, it's very much first come, first serve, and I'm super excited to be in that conversation, and to have the opportunity to, hopefully replicate those kinds of engagements very steadily over the next couple months. So thank you, Gordon, for inviting me.
All right, Mark, we'll finally let you go at that, but with that. And thank you, Gordon, for organizing, moderating, and bringing together our new incoming CEO, implementation board member, and also a governing committee co-chair in that capacity as well. But back to you, Harold, in terms of facilitating today's section of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Dones. And let's go back to the subcommittees. I know staff have prepared something in the packet for the general outline of the committees, and something about the board chairs or subcommittee officers. So I'm just going to go down the line. First, I'm not going to go down the line. I'm going to start off with something, a burning desire that I've been pushing, and I'm going to let Nate start off, because this could work with the communication officer that Mark is bringing on. So no one has not heard the battle that South Cities has, and the complaints, which are good ones. And I would be, if I was there, I'd be saying, why isn't my voice being heard? What I've been asking Nate to do is to spearhead a communication team from the implementation board, working with the communication officer. So Nate, can you describe something you see that would be valuable for the implementation board, working with the communication officer, if we had a committee going that way?
Thank you, Harold. And you can tell it's not scripted because I didn't anticipate this, but Harold, I believe just in terms of for folks' awareness too, looking at page 2 of the officers and committees document with the communication and board development committee portion of there at the end of the recommended memo that we shared with members of the board. But I think Harold, rightfully so, as my fellow co-chairs, flexing his co-chair muscles, and essentially have anointed me in this capacity, both in terms of my experience and working across the county, but also as serving as a delegate on behalf of SCA alongside Damien. But I think there's a lot of opportunities, and we've seen them clearly prior to our foundation 8 months ago, but ever since, in terms of how we coordinate and field, how do we work and operate with our 38 suburban cities, but also in terms of countywide. We have obviously a lot of key stakeholders, service providers, and interest groups and coalitions that are across that gamut too. As much as we have a forum here in terms of public comment for people to share what they would like us to focus on and opportunities for us to come to them, this is a way to not just be reactive, but also be proactive in thinking about what those opportunities could be for us to go countywide in terms of hitting each of those different sectors of our diverse stakeholder group countywide. And, Gordon's work in terms of organizing this forum discussion under intersectionality with public health and Patty Hayes is like one such great opportunity. All right, but there's a lot of that day-to-day stuff too that I think we would certainly benefit from. In this capacity, in terms of, again, I mentioned it earlier in the last section, while Mark will look to build a staff presence there, obviously there are some key skill sets and thoughtful partnerships that we all have as board members of the implementation board too. And I agree with Mark's standpoint that we essentially should stand up and own. And I think that this committee itself can have that type of scope to identify what its own mission and vision could look like in the way that we have a better grasp of what all of the other external partners that we work and operate with, what one another are doing, where are there gaps and opportunities, and how do we go about being asserting ourselves as a bit of a partner in a new form with all of those key individuals and organizations that we're a part of. But I hate to go too much more specific than that because I would like to have some of those folks that kind of develop within the subcommittee itself. But I'll stop there for now. Thanks, Harold.
Thank you, Nate. I do go off school time. Pastor Anderson, I'd like to hear your thoughts on committees and any board officer that you might be interested or might be wanting to elevate someone. Pastor Anderson, are you there? Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Paula.
I see the slight differences between the system planning committee and what was the first one? The work plan and performance committee. They feel like they overlap more than not, and wondering if you all can share what the differences are, or is this like maybe a potential to just kind of merge?
I think there's nothing that's set in stone if we want to merge the committee. What this is mostly, we're going to be coming up with some ideas of building committees. Staff, Nate and I have put some things out there, not set in stone. Like operational things should be a March preview. Policy, things that we suggest should be ours and Mark working together. So I don't think there's anything set in stone. We can make them or suggest that we have them both together or separate. Does that answer your question? Is that what you meant? So Paula, let's stay with you, but I'll come back to Pastor Anderson. Do you see yourself at any board committee that you'd like to lead or be part of, or think it should be established that's not there on the list?
Yeah, I think I would be in the work plan and performance.
Thank you. Mr. Shamanak, same questions, basically.
I don't see, I think John unfortunately dropped off. Oh, there he is actually. John,
I'm here. I really don't have anything. So there's some work going on around me and I've had to pay some attention to that here at home.
Thank you, John. The beauty of being in an office is sometimes it's like not having those distractions, and I understand completely. Mr. McHenry, I know you said some things, but I'd like to hear more what you have to say on committees. And I know you're deeply involved in committees at United Way and board officers.
Sure, no, appreciate it, Harold. Thank you for asking. Thanks for this discussion. I think earlier I thought about helping out with onboarding Mark to the community and stand by that. Mark also identified, I heard them identify regionalism, and so I do have some interest and energy if regionalism was either a committee or a subcommittee or a focus area. So onboarding and regionalism. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Well, I'd be next, but I think I've spoken enough. And so I will go past myself to Dingen.
Thank you, Harold. I would just say at a high level, I would echo Mark's point about having fewer standing committees and any other work being picked up on an ad hoc basis. And so to also echo what Paula said is that we want to make sure that there are clear lanes for the work of each committee and not a lot of overlap, which can then lead to confusion. And I think that a couple of these could be collapsed into others, perhaps. And there'll probably be some more clarity as Mark comes on and thinks about what he may need from the board as well. And then in terms of any types of personal interest, I mean, I've been on other boards and sometimes there'll be a form that'll go out and we can mark it with what our interest might be, but I'm pretty flexible and can fill in as needed in terms of wherever the co-chairs may think I may serve best, or perhaps there may be more interest from board members in certain areas and less in others, and I can fill in as needed.
Thank you very much for that. So, Adrian Quinn, is it Professor Quinn or Dr. Quinn?
No, Adrian is great. Thanks, Harold.
Okay.
I am most interested in the Systems Planning Committee.
That was short and sweet. No other comments?
No, I'm happy to help out where needed. Not on the budget committee, though.
Okay, Mr. Ramos.
Thank you. My main interest would be the System Planning Committee, if there's a vacancy. I have just two questions. One is related to the role of the co-chairs in supervision of the CEO. I believe that's the responsibility of the whole implementation board. And I think that in practice, yes, the co-chairs have a role, a very hands-on role related to the CEO and oversight. But I don't want, if it's in writing that that's the case, then the implementation board is, I believe, ceding its responsibility with regard to oversight of the CEO. And so I'd like that clarified, if it, and probably put in writing in accordance with that. The other question is related to one point that's been made earlier, is committees should exist if there's a need for them to exist. And in our case, it should serve Mark and their team. And if it doesn't serve Mark and their team, then I don't see the reason to have a committee. So I think everything should be done in full transparency with Mark. And if Mark says, well, I really need 3 committees, 4 committees, then fine. If Mark is on board with all of what's been presented, then I'm fine with it.
Am I just to respond to that point too? I think the CEO performance or like management is kind of like a day-to-day thing. Way I've looked at it, at least, but I agree with you on the full implementation board, at least having oversight of the CEO.
And I think there's something in the LIA, I'm not sure, but I know we have some bylaws down the road to go over, but that is a very good point, and I think maybe probably by next meeting we should come up with something to address that as well. So Sarah Rankin is absent. Dr. Reddy.
Hey, Harold. Yeah, thanks. Looking at these 4 committees as structured, it sort of sounds like the intention was the work plan and performance committee being internally focused and the system planning committee being more focused on what is the system we create for the region. Is that a fair assessment? Well, any which way, I'll go with system planning committee if we're gonna go with the committee. And yeah, I think that, and would certainly be happy to help in any communications discussions too.
As it said before, these could be short. We might be coming back in 6 months and looking at other committees because we don't need some committee to be involved anymore. We can dissolve it. So be flexible, ready for change. And Lamont is sitting in for Juanita Spotted Elk. So Lamont.
Yes, will leave it to Juanita to select which committee she, most resonates with and wants to bring her talents towards. Thank you, Harold.
Thank you, Lamont. So next month, our next meeting will be on the 12th, I think, or so. We'll be having more concrete and definite committees, and hopefully we'll see people jumping aboard and really diving into this work. Before we go to other business, and this is other business, a couple of you have commented about the Compassion Seattle and led by Tim Burgess, and in Auburn, the criminalizing of being homeless, like from a traffic ticket to a criminal offense. And as it's worded, it puts another barrier intentionally for those who are homeless, so they can think about that before they trespass on city property. Just from personal past, for 12 years when I was homeless, at that day one or day any of my homelessness, I really didn't care or give a hoot where it would lead me 12 years down the road. I was looking for someplace to begin, someplace that was secure, and someplace that I could, as a human being, rest my head before the next day, traveling around and carrying all my stuff on my back. I would like to just open up for anyone's comment, because I believe we are a powerful board, and I know Nate has a wonderful way of wordsmithing with y'all that we could put something together on either one of these topics. And I would like to start with Dr. Reddy.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Harold. With regards to Compassion Seattle, I feel like I just don't understand it well enough at this point, and to really comment on that particular charter amendment for Seattle. With regards to it sounds like a new ordinance for Auburn that would have criminal penalties rather than civil penalties for being encamped on public property. It seems Auburn, like many of the communities in this region, are struggling, right? Like we all know they're struggling with how to manage this problem that's burgeoning of homelessness that is just completely out of control, right? But I agree with you, Harold. This doesn't. I don't think this would be helpful. Like I think we don't want to put people into a criminal justice system in any fashion if we can help it. It impedes. Not only is there potentially trauma associated with that, but then impedes their ability to move forward, right? When that do you end up with fines, a warrant, jail time? Do you miss out on a housing opportunity, a job opportunity, et cetera? So I'm hopeful Auburn does not pass this particular ordinance. I do think, you know, we've talked a lot about regionalism and sub-regional planning here, and I think what this indicates to me is that we need to step up as well, that we need to reach out to Auburn similar in the same way that we did to Renton potentially, with a letter asking them to forego this particular ordinance, but offering any assistance that we can provide, coming down and visiting, seeing if there are resources we can pull together for them. That's sort of how I'm thinking about this. But would really appreciate hearing from the rest of the board.
Thank you, thank you. I'm not gonna, I will call up people. Lamont, do you have any comment on either one of these?
Yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant, but I don't want to go too much on a rampage. But when I saw the Compassion Seattle, you know, proposed legislation, it really made me feel very sad. You know, the Lived Experience Coalition has been deeply engaged in outreach and developing relationships with who we call our unsheltered neighbors and relatives. And 98 to 99% of those folks do not want to be on the streets. They really don't. And most have a disability. And there's not many places for them to go where they can bring their pets and they can bring their partners. And so to see something to me that feels very kind of tricky and lays a groundwork for aggressive sweeping, I find to be very sad. And the Lived Experience Coalition, people with lived experience were not asked to be at the table for the development of any of this. And so I just really hope that our community would really kind of wake up to what Glenn Martin talks about, right? That the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from resources and power. And so the LEC, the Lived Experience Coalition, people with homelessness was not consulted in this process. And we also want to end unsheltered homelessness. You know, we want to end unsheltered homelessness in downtown Seattle. So at the core, with the business community, the LEC, our unsheltered folks, we all want the same thing. And we can develop solutions that work. And we need to give the King County Regional Homeless Authority and Mark Dones a chance, you know, with all of this. And so I think these unfunded mandates are really problematic, and they can lay the groundwork for further criminalization of homelessness. And it's not the right path. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamont. Anybody else would like to comment on where we should go with this, or how the implementation board might want to step in?
Harold, and I'm sorry, I seem to be echoing a lot. I do think that it would be helpful for us to have a more lengthy discussion about this. And I know Nate mentioned at the beginning, there may be some bounds to which there may be some boundaries as to what we as an implementation board can say or do about things. I think we're not clear about that. You know, from my perspective, looking at it from a policy approach, you know, one wants to know when we're looking at a new public policy, what is the objective? Are the tools tailored to meet that objective? As Lamont said, are the right people in the room to develop those tools? How will we measure our success? And are the tools appropriate, and is the capacity sufficient to meet those? And it's unclear to me that there's alignment on any of those issues. It's not clear what the goal of the Compassion Seattle initiative is. It seems to be a bit of a mashup of a number of things. I specifically honed in on the concept of creating housing, which we're all in favor of. And I think we're all in favor, as Lamont said, of creating partnerships. And so there's some great groundwork there. But with respect to creating 2,000 it's a little bit vague about units of housing or what type of housing. Seattle is only one of the funders. I mean, generally speaking, 75% of money for housing comes from other sources other than the Seattle budget. And so it's not clear how those units would be created if Seattle budgeted only 25% of the funds for those housing, nor has there been analysis about what impact it may have on the greater region as well. And so I think there are a lot of unanswered questions that we should engage the drafters in to better understand, and potentially, if this is moving forward, improve what it is so there's alignment between whatever the goal is and the solutions for the aspects of it that we think are beneficial to the Regional Homeless Authority's efforts.
Thank you, Adrian. And I might say, we might be off topic, off subject, and we might have no influence, I know, on this, but just being formerly homeless, I look at things on, things used to vomit out of my mouth when I was home, had 2 kids in a corner unit, 2 dogs. I was a perfect American family. Things happen in life that change your mind. And when you've lived on the street, you stop thinking about policy-wise, but how does it harm our fellow human being? And homeless people, for no reason of their own, are on the street. And I think this board and a lot of other places in King County should start thinking about that in the forefront of their mind. We have a lot of philanthropy throughout the city, and especially here at Boeing, where it's just polluted with the riches of our commerce. Land that can't be used. We have $1 million filter system in Duwamish that has to be changed quarterly. We looked at that, put that in the forefront of our mind of how industry has raped this land that's not ours. And stop putting that and blaming the homeless, but maybe we could do a lot better in our forefront of thinking of how to solve homelessness. I just wanted to put that out there because it was saddening this week just to see more and more criminalization of people who have hard enough time already. Criminalize, where are we going to put them? Where are they going to go? Let's criminalize them. Let's do something else. And let's be political about it. That just turns my stomach in the wrong way. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now and turn it over to Nate.
Yeah, Harold, I just noticed Michael Ramos and then Gordon had their hands up, and so maybe we'll go in that order. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. 2 thoughts. One is jurisdictional. What is our role? And at this period of time when a team is coming on board and is essence already moving, where they should be able to weigh in and lend their influence as they wish on these matters, rather than us speaking as an implementation board. So it's a question of jurisdiction and when and where we weigh in, and what's the criteria for when we weigh in. There's a lot that we could weigh in on. And this is a big change from previous iterations of homelessness committees, because they've pretty much stood aside while cities did what they felt was right for themselves. So it's a jurisdictional question. That being said, with regard to the 2 issues, one thing we could do in the short term is point the discussion and direction, for example, in the city of Seattle, to the LEC. In other words, to issue a letter saying that in consideration of this, that it's really the Lived Experience Coalition who should be at the table weighing in and would have the most to say and offer with regard to solutions around homelessness in the city of Seattle. So that would be one. And then the second is related to Auburn. And what I would suggest there is that we commend them to the good work of Dr. Sarah Rankin and all her work on the criminalization of homelessness over decades, of which there's a volume of printed material, and give a precaution to the city to say efforts that that have the effect of criminalizing homelessness are not only counterproductive, likely unconstitutional. And we commend further study based on Dr. Rankin's research over many years. In other words, we can point in the direction of where they can get more information that would help redirect the conversation. So that's just a thought to add to the mix.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Mr. McHenry.
Hey, it's Gordon. Thank you, Harold. Very much appreciate we taking time to talk about both these issues. And I have no disagreement with anything that's been stated in the last few minutes by my fellow members of the implementation board. I do think it would be appropriate, especially with Mark not yet an employee, for us to offer ourselves to the city of Auburn as a resource, to learn more, and as a resource, as a problem solve, or create new processes, policies, procedures. In transparency, I've attended one briefing by Mayor Bacchus, so I learned a little bit more from their perspective. I'll just say I think it's worth us offering ourselves to Auburn as a resource in advance of Mark leading the organization. With regard to Compassion Seattle, I think Adrian summed it up in many ways quite well. There's process, and Lamont spoke to that. There's policy and there's politics. All three are very much intersecting in a messy way. It won't become actionable unless 33,000+ people sign on to it. I think we should invite the folks behind Compassion Seattle to brief the implementation board, perhaps in June or maybe even in May. It's not yet filed, but I know it's going to be filed. I suspect it'll get enough signatures. So I think we should learn more about what's intended, and also be thinking about unintended consequences should it be passed by the voters. And I'll stop there.
Simba, you had your hand raised again. Is that right? Do you have anything more?
No, Gordon took it right out of my mouth. That was fantastic.
Thanks. I'll jump in, Harold. Just before going to the 2 points that we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes or so, I just did want to recognize, and we kind of made an abrupt transition to other business here without kind of closing out our last section on the agenda, which I think was really important in talking about our committee dynamics, and this discussion really being a framework to go for Harold and I and staff to take back to Mark after today's meeting. And so what I'll just say, without having to go back to that section entirely and facilitate the conversation, is that if any of the other board members, now that we've had this discussion, you see the memo that we presented to you today, if there are any additional thoughts or ideas outside of the scope of what these 5-6 committees look like, please let us know, because we, again, have that strong flexibility to work with Mark in terms of framing what, in the end, I heard a lot of you say, really what Mark wants to do and how this fits in conjunction, in partnership with the staff that they're bringing on board, we're all for. And so in that, again, the more substance in terms of what you're hoping to get into, if there's something that we're missing in that capacity that we'd like us to expand on, please let us know. Again, I think a lot of the conversation was also focused on the subcommittees, but the very first portion was outside of co-chairs too. There was treasurer, secretary, and that's been something we've been talking about since September as well. So after today, while we've also missing a few board members, hopeful to connect with or follow up with each of you too, in terms of what areas might be interested in you as it relates to some of these positions, both on committee but also in joining Harold and I in terms of the secretary and treasurer roles. In regards to advocacy, as Adrian referred to, I had mentioned to her that while we're essentially like working with legal counsel to understand some of the parameters that we have in the authority. As you've experienced through the CEO hiring process, Deanna from Pacifica has been helpful, essentially on loan to us from the city and our county to advise on what parameters we may have to endorse policies that are on the ballot box. We haven't asked that question of her and being able to get that guidance. And, from us, it's kind of, how does that work from us as an implementation board independently or in partnership with the governing committee counterparts? I just don't know what that is and what that looks like in terms of our standing as an authority. But again, echo in support of Gordon's call, and if others feel so too, and bringing members of the Compassion Seattle Charter Initiative to a future board meeting as early as June to have that common conversation for us. As was suggested by Simha and Harold, I'd be happy to draft a letter to the city of Auburn with others in the same way we did with Renton regarding their ordinance. I think the issues and the complexities here are uniquely different. And however, this isn't a independent site where the Red Lion was in Renton. There are there's tribal engagement and factors into this as well with the Auburn ordinance in regards to the Puyallup and the Muckleshoots on the land and the waterways that are incorporated. I know the city held a study session on Monday that was about almost 2 hours long as part of in terms of this ordinance being considered. And I encourage my fellow board members to watch it to kind of learn more about what the city is proposing and how they presented it to the council and to the public. I understand that the city is looking to move forward with trying to have a vote on that by next Monday. So this letter would be a fairly short turnaround for us, but again, happy to rally on that in any way that the board would seek interest in me and Harold working with other members of this board and pulling that together, and including Sarah Rankin if she's able to while she's kind of out this week. But for myself, upon learning about the ordinance yesterday, I did call the mayor in the afternoon to try and learn more from Mayor Backus. And she was quick to respond. And I had a chance to briefly hear from her and members of her staff about the ordinance itself and kind of what led us there. As I'm still trying to get smart on the history, background, context, and all this incorporates, and finishing the study, watching the study session myself too, I'm happy to talk about dynamics of what this letter could include, including Michael's points on referencing of studies and resources and information, other information to consider for the council prior to next Monday's vote. I saw Michael raise her hand up and down, but okay, now I saw Michael and then Damien.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Nate. I have a question about inviting Compassion Seattle to our meeting when there is no ballot initiative yet. And we do not, it's a group that is meeting and discussing the issue. And I don't know that we should give more weight to it than what currently exists. There are a lot of groups we could meet with in terms of weighing in on matters of great impact around homelessness. I guess I have a question about bringing a group in, engaging in dialogue in the absence of our CEO being in place and directing where a public conversation is of benefit to the authority in terms of being able to help redirect, reshape, or reframe a particular initiative, rather than it is a group that has gathered together to consider some options. The other issue related to it is how much weight do we put on an issue that's inner Seattle at the very beginning of Mark's tenure, when we have we're a regional authority, and Seattle will have initiatives coming and going. That's going to always happen. And so I guess the question is, if we proceed with an invitation, it should be done with Mark's full knowledge and consent so that it serves the purposes of the authority and their leadership as they begin their tenure.
Thank you, Michael, for that. And then Damien.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I completely understand the importance of the two issues that have been brought today and why some of the immediacy around wanting to have a conversation about these. But I would also just, to the extent possible as we move forward as a board, I really want us to focus on what Nate said just a couple of minutes ago about the importance of the background and context of a situation before we begin, or before I feel comfortable to comment on something, or to even support as an individual board member, whether or not the board moves forward with some type of letter. So just obviously there was something put in the chat around Compassion Seattle, but also around the Auburn piece, or knowing about the executive session that happened the other day. Those are pieces for me as a board member that are essential for me to even want to have an informed, non-ignorant position about an issue going on in a particular city or region.
Thank you, Damien. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? We had other announcements of business, which Gordon spoke to already about the upcoming forum that he's helping moderate. But seeing none, is there any other business or announcements that board members have for the group? All right. Well, I will tack on as we still only have 7 minutes left, but getting end of conversation and comments for at least this portion. As we're wrapping up this meeting, I would have taken upon myself kind of unsettled direction here in regards to, I don't think we need to make any decisions in terms of where we are and on Compassion Seattle and the possibility of bringing them in. I think there's also just some concerns and questions from the legal standpoint, which we'll work to settle. And understanding what type of role our implementation board can really have in the advocacy space when it comes to things that are on the ballot issues. And I think Michael Ramos raises good points too in terms of what's really worthy of our agenda time and the way that we do meet monthly. And I've obviously extended our meeting agendas to 2 hours to take on all the stuff that we need to do operationally and otherwise, stand up the authority. In regards to a potential letter to Auburn, I'll just take it upon myself with Harold to connect with, follow with each of you individually, as well as those who aren't able to be here, understanding it's spring break and we're missing a few folks here today. We'll follow up with Sarah and Juanita as well. Again, I'll do a last call on any other questions or comments before I entertain a motion to adjourn today's meeting. Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn today's meeting.
Gordon here, so moved.
Thank you, Gordon. Have a second. Thank you, Damien, as a second. All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. All right. With that, seeing no opposition, motion passes. We will adjourn and we will see you all for our next regularly scheduled meeting on Wednesday, May 12th at 2 p.m. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I'll talk to you all later.
And thank you for your comments.